This is an interview with Dr. Lawrence J. Pijeaux, the Executive Director of the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute. I'm Dr. Horace Huntley. We're presently at the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute. Today is June 11, 1997. Dr. Pijeaux, I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to come and sit and talk with me this morning. Basically, what we're doing is just trying to develop some brief biographies. And you being the executive director of the Institute is one of the first persons that we really need to look at in this regard. So I want to talk about you, your background. Tell me a little about where are you from?
I'm from New Orleans, Louisiana.
New Orleans, Louisiana. And your parents, were they originally from New Orleans?
Yes, both of my parents are from New Orleans.
Yeah.
From different sections of the city.
Okay.
My mother is from an area that would be considered, I think now it's called Sixth Ward. New Orleans is divided up into wards, and the wards are geographic in nature.
Mm-hmm.
Just like you have north, south, east, west. Here in New Orleans, you have Third Ward, Fourth Ward, Sixth Ward, Seventh Ward. Well, my mother was from the Sixth Ward, which was primarily located in downtown New Orleans. My dad is originally from an area called the Seventh Ward, which is basically southwest. It's adjacent to Sixth Ward, but it's southwest of downtown.
So both of them were born in New Orleans?
Yes.
In the city?
That's
Were
right.
their parents from New Orleans as well?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
so
and my grandparents lived long enough for me to get to know them.
right.
I think one of the things that's unique about my family is that they are a mixture of Creoles, and Creoles is just, I guess, what would be called multicultural today.
Right,
It's a mixture of
Yeah.
French and
Pijeaux.
African
What is
American.
Pijeaux? What is the name Pijeaux? Is that French?
It's a French name, yes, it really is. But as I was explaining with this whole Creole background that I bring, my father is a very fair-skinned person, and all of his family members are.
Right.
And more often than not, when people think of Creoles, they think of light-skinned people,
Right.
but they don't realize that they are really a mixture of people. Some are light-skinned, some are dark-skinned.
Right.
My mother's family, they're dark-skinned Creoles, but the one thing that they had in common was the language. And unfortunately, that's something that was not passed on to my generation.
Mm-hmm.
But I have these vivid memories of my grandmothers, both my dad's mother and my mother's mother, speaking Creole, which was a form of, or is a form of broken French.
Well, would that be similar to Ebonics?
Yes, right. Yes, another way of communicating. Yeah, I find it interesting that when we talk about Ebonics, people don't realize that our people have been bilingual
That's right.
since we first came to this country. And that's nothing to be ashamed of. We've had to find a way to communicate among our own, because we came here in a situation where we were stripped of our language.
Right.
And we came with many languages.
Yeah. And so we developed a language that would be suitable somewhere in between one and the other.
I agree, and it was a language that we all became very familiar with, and more often than not, I think all of us have grown up with some form of what's now called Ebonics.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, the New Orleans thing is very fascinating to me, being from Birmingham. And I see just the city itself, the layout of the city. And it's an old city.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is.
Can you just talk about the early days in New Orleans? Well, before you do that, let me ask you though about your parents. The educational level of your father and your mother, did they finish high school?
No, neither of them finished high school. I guess they were probably what's called middle school.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Dropouts, if you will, because both of them, I think, dropped out either in 7th or 8th grade.
Yeah.
Trying to find a way to survive in this cruel country that we live in.
That's right. Did you have siblings?
Yes, I have two sisters who are both younger than I.
Okay.
But one of the things that was not unique in my family, but I think common to us as a people, in particular my generation, and that is education was always important. I remember as my sisters and I went to high school and beyond, it was always important to our parents that we did well, that we did homework, even though they couldn't determine whether or not what we did was right. They knew we had done something, and they made an assumption that it was okay. But the bottom line was that we had to do homework every night.
Absolutely, absolutely. What kind of work did your parents do?
My mother was a housewife for the most part.
Okay.
And my dad was many things, including porter, truck driver, but basically would be called a laborer, a common laborer.
Mm-hmm. And the area of New Orleans that you grew up in, what area? Was it?
The Ninth Ward,
The Ninth Ward.
which was southern part, very southern part of the city, very poor section of the city. Most of the people who lived in that area were like my parents.
Mm-hmm. Working class community.
Class, yeah, very much so.
Tell me just a bit about your elementary school days. What elementary school did you start?
I attended McCarty Elementary School, all black elementary school, and academics was always important at the school.
Yeah.
Always important, and I remember growing up, not only in elementary school, but junior high and senior high, and I'm a product of a segregated school system, and in many ways I think I'm ahead of the game in terms of education, because education was always a high priority. I remember all of my teachers telling me that you have to be better than everybody else if you're going to succeed in this world.
Right.
And so my teachers, and in particular there was a gentleman, a Mr. Lewis, who I remember, very vividly, and I have fond memories of this guy. For some reason he liked me, he saw something in me. He always encouraged me to do well in school, and even as I became an adult, our paths crossed frequently. When I moved into public education, returning to the school system that I had graduated from, this guy was an assistant principal, and he encouraged me to return to school and get an advanced degree, and ultimately he became a peer of mine. We were principals during the same period of time in New Orleans. So it was him, and then there was another guy who I met in high school, who again is a black male,
yeah.
who saw something in me and encouraged me to go on to school. He encouraged me, this guy, Danny McLean, who I met when I was in high school, encouraged me to pursue art as a career. And so that's what got me into the visual arts.
Yeah.
You know.
Were you involved in any extracurricular activities in high school?
Yes, I played. In high school, I played basketball. In junior high school, I played several sports, I participated in several sports, including football and basketball. But when I moved to the high school level, I was really interested in art, and I sang in a choir, and then I played basketball.
So then you were somewhat of a Renaissance man in terms of high school. If you did sports, art, and you were a good student as well, you had, basically you're suggesting that you had a person or persons that were interested in you, and they helped you to develop that vision that you were developing.
Yeah. At every step, there was somebody, not only my parents, but there was somebody out there. And it was either, more often than not, it was a black male, but in junior high school I met an African-American female. And you notice I'm bouncing between black and African-American when I'm old enough to go from nigger, colored, Afro, African, all of these titles or labels that have been associated with us. I remember them. But there has always been somebody in my life who has seen some ability in me, and that person has encouraged me. And I've tried to pass that on. And I've tried to identify people who have had some ability, and I've tried to help them because I've learned from people who've helped me.
Right. What year did you finish high school?
1962, man.
1962.
I graduated from McDonald 35 Senior High School in New Orleans, Louisiana, in 1962. Excuse me. All black high school, college prep high school, very small.
Very small. What do you mean in terms of numbers?
Numbers. If I'm not mistaken, we had less than 400 people in the entire school. And in my graduating class, we may have had 70, 75 people. Principal knew everybody by name. He had a doctorate from Harvard. In some ways, when I became a principal, I kind of patted myself after this guy. He knew what he was doing. He was always well groomed, and he tried to get to know everybody in the school. And the other person I had good memories about.
Was this a public school?
Public school.
The New Orleans school system, 400. Now was this an average size school, or was this a small?
This was a small school. It had selected enrollment. You had to apply for admission. And really, when I was in middle school, or junior high school, as my school was, I was not thinking about attending a college prep high school. And I went to the school because of some of my friends who attended the school, who encouraged me to attend the school, and did not realize, for the most part, what I was experiencing until long after the experience. Became an adult and looked back and saw so many people who were graduates of this school, who had gone on to do a lot of positive things in the country. And then I really had a much better appreciation for the experience that I had.
Was this a neighborhood school, or did you have to
No,
catch
this
the
was,
bus?
I rode the bus. I passed by several white schools where folk called me nigger and 2468, we don't want to integrate. No, I remember all that, you know. But those things, I think, have helped to make me the person that I am. I'm strong in some of my convictions. I think I'm a lot more sensitive to the needs of other people based on my experiences. And those experiences also helped me to develop self-confidence.
This was a time in the early 60s when schools were desegregated. Was that happening in New Orleans at the time?
Sure, yes it was, man.
Did you ever consider, did your family ever consider you being one of those students who would go to desegregate one of the white schools?
No, that was never a consideration. I was happy where I was having a great time. My parents were pleased with the education that I was receiving, and so that was never a consideration of mine. Even when I went on to college, I wanted to be with my people. I had gained and benefited from the nourishment that I had received in this all-black environment for the most part. And when I made a decision on entering graduate school, then I went to a different environment. I went to Tulane University. And really, I went there because of the name recognition and the resources that the school offered.
So after you finished high school, then did you immediately go on to college?
Yes, I did. I went from high school, went from McDonald 35 to Southern University in New Orleans, which was a branch of the main campus in Baton Rouge. And really, from then on, I was working. I was out there in the world of work, working my way through college.
So you worked during the time?
I worked while I was attending school.
This, of course, was a very important time as far as the movement was concerned. With your going to school and with your working, you didn't have the opportunity then to be involved in a lot of the demonstrations, I would assume.
Well, yes and no. I was involved because our university was involved in some demonstrations. But my major contribution was the boycott.
Okay.
But I would not spend my money in any place or with anybody that didn't have any appreciation for me and my people.
1962 here in Birmingham, that was what we call the selective buying campaign. And in fact, it was a boycott, but it was illegal to use the term boycott, so they used selective buying campaign. And the downtown stores were affected, and it was based upon primarily the Alabama Christian movement and sort of a coalition with Miles College students. Very successful. Did the same kind of situation exist in New Orleans?
Yes, sure. Same thing. Basically, the same things that were happening in Birmingham were happening in New Orleans to varying degrees. we were boycotting. We had sit-ins. We had boycotts. People were not riding the bus. I mean, you name it, we were doing it.
The buses were set up on the same manner that Birmingham was.
Same system.
You had the board. You
sat behind it. We called it a screen, but it was really a board. But we used to call it a screen. And I remember as a kid riding the bus with my grandmother, my father's mother, who was a very, very fair-skinned woman. And my grandmother would not sit behind that screen. And nobody could tell whether she was white or black. And so nobody bothered her. So I had the experience of riding in front of the screen and behind the screen during the period of time when it was illegal for black people to ride in front of the screen.
That depend on the grandmother that
That's
you
right.
rode with.
That's right. that was a real interesting experience. My grandmother lived in uptown New Orleans, adjacent to what's now called the Garden District. So it was a mixed neighborhood. And I remember as a youngster, I was probably somewhere between 8 and 12, playing with my grandmother's neighbors' grandchildren. We used to go visit during the summer, and these were white kids. And we'd play together in the neighborhood, and nobody would bother us. Had a real good relationship, and I often wonder how these kids are doing. Well, they're adults now, and been adults a long time. I wonder how they're doing now. But when we would go to the movie, I would be upstairs. I had to go around the side.
You would go to the movies together?
We would go to the movies together, but we couldn't sit together. And we'd be in the movie throwing popcorn at one another. I was upstairs in the balcony throwing popcorn at them downstairs, and they would be downstairs throwing it back at me. And we had a real good relationship. And at that period of time, I wasn't really aware of the differences between the races. But as I got older, I really became very cognizant of the differences and what some people could do and what some people couldn't do. And a part of that experience has stayed with me and has motivated me to bring about some changes in what takes place with people. And I find it ironic that here I am at the Institute where I can bring about some change.
That reminds me of growing up, and we had white friends as well. But it's up to we started the school. And once we started the school, they went to their schools and we went to our schools. We still see each other occasionally after school. But as you grew older, we then grew apart.
Yeah, that was the experience I had with these young people who lived next to my grandmother.
Why did you make the decision to go to Southern New Orleans?
Well, all along the way through my schooling, from elementary, junior high, and high school, my teachers encouraged me to attend an all-black school. I could have gone to other schools, but I wanted to continue my educational experience in an all-black arena. The expectations for me were high. The nurturing, I thought, would be different in that environment. I did not want to become a number, a statistic. I wanted to attend a school where people had some appreciation for my experiences and could relate to those experiences.
Did you ever consider going to Baton Rouge?
Yes, I did. And after spending a year at Southern in New Orleans, I spent a year at Grambling. And had a good experience, but didn't have the money to stay there. So dropped out for a while and traveled around the country as a waiter.
Is that right?
Yeah. I've had some unique experiences.
So you went to Southern New Orleans.
I started at Southern New Orleans and then transferred.
Transferred to Grambling. What was that transition like? Now you're a big city, really. Going to Grambling, which is basically a rural area. What was that transition like?
I enjoyed it because for the first time in my life, I was out there on my own and I had to take care of myself. And some of the things that my mother helped me with as a kid, learning how to press clothes, learning how to wash, fold clothes, do a little cooking, all of those things that this lady had been telling me would be important and that I reluctantly did. here they came looking at me square in the face where I had to do these things. So it was a smooth adjustment, one that I didn't realize would come about as quickly as it came about. But I was able to do those things that I needed to do to survive, and I really enjoyed that experience too. It taught me about survival skills, if you will. It taught me how to make it in this world.
Right.
And unfortunately, I just didn't have the money to stay at Grambling. And so then I dropped out of school.
Let me ask you before you talk about that. You were somewhat of a sports enthusiast.
Yes.
Now you're at Grambling.
Mm-hmm.
Eddie Robinson is at Grambling.
Sure.
Of course, during this period, you're talking about Grambling football.
Grambling football and Grambling basketball.
And basketball.
Willis Reed was on the team then when I was at Grambling.
That's right. Can you talk about that?
Oh, that was the most exciting college or university experience that I've had in my life. The campus was a hotbed for academics, athletics, and music. Not only did they have an outstanding football team, they had an outstanding baseball team, they had an outstanding basketball team, and they had one of the top bands in the country.
That's right.
The band was traveling all around the country. And a lot of people don't realize that. Grambling at this time was producing several Major League Baseball players. A lot of people don't realize that occurred at Grambling. The president was the coach
Of the baseball?
of the baseball team. The president of the university was the head baseball coach at this time. Shoot.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah. It was just a real interesting experience. The team that Willis Reed played on, and many people may not know it, but Willis Reed is in the Hall of Fame. If I'm not mistaken, he was selected as one of the 50 top basketball players.
Right.
Well, the team that Willis Reed was on also produced other professional basketball players. Jimmy Jones was one. Jimmy Jones became a player with the Baltimore Bullets, then, if I'm not mistaken. And
right.
they won a championship. Yeah. They won an NBA championship. Well, you had all of these things going on.
Had Buck Buchanan left there?
Buchanan had just left there.
So he was a Birmingham boy.
Right, I know. You had Buchanan there. James Harris was on the way out, who became the first big time NFL quarterback. They had others, I think. I think maybe the first may have been a kid from, well, not a kid now, but the first may have been a guy from the University of Tennessee who played he played wide receiver and quarterback for a very short period of time in the NFL.
Yeah.
Can't remember his
Harris
name.
was the first
To really make it.
Yes. As a quarterback.
But so there was a lot of excitement in the air. And I really wanted to say that, but again, didn't have the money.
Right.
So I had to.
So then what did you do?
Well, I dropped out of school for about 2 years.
Did you go back to New Orleans?
I did go to New Orleans, and I had an uncle who was a professional waiter, who was in a management position. I had worked with him during the summers. I had worked with him after school on occasions. And he was traveling around the country as a waiter. He worked for a company. And during the summer, he was on Mackinac Island working. You may have heard of this island. Well, I worked there during the summer and traveled to different parts of the country working as a professional waiter. Saved a little money, helped purchase a home for my parents during that period of time. Working as a waiter.
You're traveling the country. Where did you go?
We worked in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, at a racetrack there. Worked at Churchill Downs, where you have the Kentucky Derby. Worked at Keelan Race Course in Lexington, Kentucky, where you had at the time, it was one of the most beautiful racetracks in the world, Keelan Race Course, they called it. Worked at a place called the Red Mile Trotting Track, New Orleans, Mackinac Island. There was a real circuit that we traveled.
Now your uncle was a manager in the company.
He was a manager in the dining room. In many places he was the head waiter, and in some places he was a captain.
And how long did you do this?
Did that on a regular basis for 2 years. Part-time did it for several years while working my way through school.
How long did it take you to get back into school?
About 2 years.
And you went where?
I went back to Southern in New Orleans. And from there, after spending about a year, I think, in Southern in New Orleans, and when I went back to Southern in New Orleans, stopped traveling, I was hired as a bus driver in New Orleans. So I was one of the first African American bus drivers in New Orleans. I worked for the transit company at night as a driver, and I attended Southern in New Orleans during the day. So again, I'm still working my way through school, saved up a little money, and then transferred to Southern in Baton Rouge because Southern in New Orleans was just about 3 or 4 years old, I think, at the time, and they did not have an education department. So I was pursuing a degree in art, but decided to focus on art education because there just weren't too many African Americans, too many black people out there who were making money as fine artists. Right. So I decided I'd become a teacher. I was impressed with the work of some of the people who had impacted me in a positive way. So I wanted to that was my first goal, to give something back to the community, to return as a teacher.
So when you then finished at Southern Baton Rouge, was your first position in New Orleans?
It was. Before I graduated, as a matter of fact, I was recruited for a position in New Orleans.
At what level? High school, elementary school?
It was a middle school. The school district was changing from the junior, senior high concept to the middle high school concept. Right. And so I was hired by a gentleman who knew me from my days as a student. He remembered me playing ball. I played basketball against him. He was a coach, and he had become the personnel director. And he knew a little bit about my background. I wasn't fresh. I mean, I hadn't just gone from high school to college and returning for a job. He knew that I had a variety of experiences and saw that as a plus, and hired me to work at a middle school that was involved in desegregation. Tough job. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah, that should have been an experience. If you were talking about the whole concept of desegregating, this being a changing school, so it's a white school that was changing.
That's right. Well, it was a white school that was bringing blacks in. Okay. But now think about my background. Yeah. Okay. I felt up to the challenge. I had a variety of experiences. Yeah. I had gone through as a high school student the fury of whites who were in opposition to the desegregation of the public school system. And the system had desegregated, never integrated. Right. It was in the process of desegregation, and it was a very slow process. Yeah. This school that I was headed to as an art instructor was in its second or third year of this whole desegregation movement in New Orleans. And all of the schools didn't move toward desegregating at the same pace. Right. This school bussed in youngsters from different areas of the city to help make this desegregation work. And it was a struggle.
I've heard all kinds of stories from teachers who went into situations such as that about the difficulties that they had with children as well as with administration. What were your experiences?
Well, it was a tough environment to be in. One, that many of the students, for the first time, they found themselves in a desegregated environment. And the kids still stayed close to those youngsters who were like them in many ways. There was not a lot of mingling. Where you did find mingling was in the performing arts and athletics, where you find it now. So what you see now is not so different from what I experienced 25 years ago. And in terms of the staff, I can only give some assumptions, but I felt some resentment from those whites who had been in this school, who saw the school gradually changing in terms of the racial makeup of the professional staff. Now, I really feel that the experiences that I brought to this job really helped me to make what I felt was a smooth transition from the university level to my first job as an instructor. And I went to this school during the middle of the school year. People really needed me. So that was a plus for me. They needed me. They had been through several art teachers who had no control based on what I saw and what I was told prior to my arrival. Had no control over the kids. And kids were very disrespectful. And when I went in, I felt some of that. I mean, kids started off challenging me, but very quickly they understood that I was there to provide educational experiences for them, and no matter what, I was going to do that. And so after about a week, it was clear understanding who was in control.
Right. You know, some people ask a question about whether your Creole background had any assisted you in any way. Or in New Orleans, Creole, you're either black or white, just as any place else.
Well, the assumption, I think, could be that because I'm fair-skinned, that maybe things were easier for me than they may have been for darker-skinned African Americans. But that was not the case for me. It was not the case, and again, I'm making some assumptions here. I think it wasn't the case because I see myself as being a little different. I've always had some appreciation for who I am, and I've always been the way I am. And with me, what you see is what you get. And I've never been willing to sell myself for any doggone thing. If I believe it, that's the way I'm headed. If I don't believe in it, then I'm gonna tell you that, and then we can agree to disagree. We don't have to be enemies. But I have never been one who would be willing to sell myself for anything.
So in New Orleans, there was you were black or white. There was no, like in Brazil, there's something called the mulatto escape hatch, where people that are lighter skinned are not put in at the same level as a phenotypically black person. But of course, you're not at the level of that person that is white either. That didn't exist.
Oh, yeah, there were varying degrees of that. Sure, people made assumptions about people based on how they looked initially. But my experience has been, once people see how you operate, once they find out whether or not they can buy and sell you, then they will treat you a little differently. And there have been several people in my hometown who I felt, and again, here I'm dealing with assumptions because I don't know all of the facts, but as an outsider looking in, I felt people were given an opportunity because of the way they looked. And then they were able to hold on to those opportunities because of what they did.
Right.
And in many instances, what they did was for them and only them, or for them and people who were close to them, and not for the masses.
Right.
I have never bought into that mentality.
Yeah. So there was, of course, the whole concept of color consciousness.
Sure.
But also the concept of class. How did that play into the New Orleans situation? I know that the school that you were going into, was that in a working class neighborhood, just like the one that you came out of?
Oh, it was in what I would describe as a red light district.
Okay.
It was an oasis in a sewer. Okay. This school that I attended was in downtown New Orleans on Rampart Street. Have you heard of Rampart Street? The history of Rampart Street. Okay. I remember. Let me tell you this. My school was directly. My high school was directly across from what my grandmother used to call it a house of ill repute. Okay. And I remember looking out of my chemistry class window at men who were across the street from me in a building where they would have their underwear on the line. And these men wore rags around there. They tied rags around their head. and they would flirt with other men. And whenever, on occasion, whenever the instructor would turn his head and he would be talking about chemical makeups of various things, some of my friends and I would be saying ugly things to people in this building. And I remember one occasion we went to lunch and we found ourselves teasing some guys, and they chased us all through the schoolhouse. So that tells you a little bit about
your high school.
that tells you a little bit about the high school that I attended. But even with all of that, Dr. Huntley, education was always held at high esteem in this place.
Right. Now, the school that you first taught in, was it in the same area?
No.
Was it in a different
No, this school was on Esplanade, which at the time was a middle-class neighborhood that served the traditional middle-class community at that time, which was white. So there was some concern from members of the community about the change in the school, and the community started changing. People started moving out.
Right.
Whites started moving out, and blacks started moving in. And now today, like many schools, it's become an all-black school.
Now you would stay in education and you become principal in New Orleans.
Right.
How long did it take you to rise to that position?
Very quickly, man. As I look back on my life, things have happened. It took me a while to get started. But after I got started, things just started happening very, very quickly to me. I was in the classroom. I worked at Southern University in New Orleans for 2 years. Well, let me give you the chronology of this. I worked at the middle school, and it was a McDonald 28. I worked there for 1 year. And after that year, I worked there for 1 semester, not 1 year, because I went there in the middle of the school year. Graduated in January and went there shortly after graduation. Spent a semester there, did a good job. School system wanted me to stay, but I was offered a position at Southern University in New Orleans. One of my former instructors was accepted at Indiana University to work on a doctorate. And so he recommended me to replace him. I stayed there for 2 years.
What did you do then?
I was an art instructor, worked in the art department. Had a great experience, but realized at that time I wanted to help mold and shape the lives of young people. So decided I did not want to work at the university level at that time. Went to graduate school in a Tulane, and not only did I earn a Master of Arts in Teaching degree, but I certified for the principalship. I was selected for an assistant principalship shortly after that. And after coming out, and I'm trying to revisit all this in my head, after earning my master's, I went to Eleanor McMahon, which is a public school in New Orleans, which was starting a college prep program. So because of my background and my credentials, I was selected for this job at McMahon. I stayed there for 2 years, and then I moved into an assistant principalship. Stayed at the assistant principal's level for, I think, 4 or 5 years, and then moved into the principalship.
What type of school did you receive as your first school as a principal?
Well, my first year was the acting principal of a school where I had been an assistant principal. And that school was predominantly black, relatively new school, poorly constructed, poorly designed. Real large school. Grades 9 through 12 had in excess of 2,200 students. Good experience for me though, because it gave me an opportunity to see what could be done in the school. Like many people, when you second or third in command, you always second guessing the person who's heading the ship up.
Right.
And I was like that. And when it became my turn to take care of the building. I had quickly, my friend, I developed a much better appreciation and understanding for what the guy who I was replacing was experiencing. Because for the first time, the buck stopped with me. I couldn't pass it to anybody. I couldn't say the principal wanted me to do this. I couldn't say I was following directions. I had to make decisions, and it was a great learning experience for me. And we did make change. We were able to show growth in test scores. We were able to turn a deficit into a solvent budget. So in a very short period of time, we were able to do some of these things. But I had the advantage of working in the environment. Right. So I knew where some changes could be made, unlike somebody who was brand new, who would have to find out where the changes needed to be made.
And how long did you stay there?
I stayed there for 1 year. Stayed there for 1 year, and then was selected to head up a school that everybody thought was going to fail. They were ready to close this place. And so they said, give it to Pijeaux. He's not going to do anything with this place. Well, as fate would have it, a few years later, we were able to show substantial growth, not only in test scores, reduce the violence at the school, and
all of these are inner city schools.
All these are inner city schools, public schools where I'm working. Now, as I'm working at this school where I am the principal, I enter the University of Southern Mississippi in Hattiesburg in the doctoral program, and become very interested in the effective schools research. A lot of people don't realize it, but one of the fathers of that movement is Ron Edmonds, a brother who worked in New York City and in Michigan and in other parts of the country. And basically what this brother was saying is, we know everything we need to know to make a difference in school. The question is, do we want to change things? He also believed, as I do, it doesn't matter where kids come from. What matters is what you do within the four walls of those schools. And kids should not be held accountable for the actions of their parents. It's no kid's fault that he may grow up in an environment like I did, where my parents weren't well educated, or grow up in an environment like I did, where my people were poor. None of those things have duly squat to do with whether or not this kid can achieve in school. And I really embraced that notion when I started this doctoral program, because I was looking for what could I find that was out there that was being done. I didn't want to reinvent the wheel. I wanted to find out what was being done. And some of the things this brother found as he did his research around the country. And there were other people working with him. Some people heard of Brookover, and there are a few other people who I can't call right now. But I did my research on this for my doctorate. Well, anyway, a couple of things that you can find in schools that are effective. One, people are clear on the goals. They know where they're going. Two, they monitor student performance. And three, the schools are clean and orderly. These places are safe. And when you see people moving around, everybody can see that there's some business taking place here. And you don't have to go visit a school and stay in somebody's classroom for 30, 40 minutes to get some sense of what's going on. You walk in that building, you can tell whether or not that education is important. So I traveled to some of the school districts that were experiencing some success. I went to Memphis, visited with Harrington, who is now mayor. He was superintendent, went to some of his schools. Saw some of those same characteristics that Edmund was talking about there. Went to Atlanta.
This is when you're working on your doctorate.
This is when I'm working on my doctorate and I'm principal of a school. Met Alonzo Krim, who was doing some real positive things in Atlanta. And Krim and Harrington are probably the two longest tenured African-American superintendents in any major school systems in this country. Those guys made some positive changes in those districts. But those things that Ron Edmonds had found in his research, I found them in those schools that were doing well in those two cities. And so I implemented those things.
You were a principal and you worked on your doctorate at the same time.
Yes.
How did you juggle those two?
Well, once I found what I was looking for in terms of what I could use at the school site to make a positive impact on students and teachers, then I kind of backed off on the doctorate. And spent some time, doing some serious things in schools. Was selected as one of 10 American heroes in education, I think it was 1989, and left New Orleans and went to New Jersey and took on another principalship. And
why did you decide to leave New Orleans?
well, that's a whole other story. It's related to my wife and I making a decision that it was time for us to leave. But left New Orleans and took on a principalship in New Jersey. And with my wife, my sister, and my mother encouraging me to return to school to complete the doctorate. With that support, I did it.
Okay.
So I finished the doctoral program while in New Jersey. And there's another story about that. I was commuting to Hattiesburg, Mississippi from New Jersey. Had somebody working on. I had a young lady who was actually the typist for my dissertation, who was about 150 miles away from me. She was in New Jersey also. Had met her through someone at Seton Hall University who referred me to this lady as a typist. So I was commuting between two cities in New Jersey, working on a doctorate, and also commuting between New Jersey and Mississippi, working on a doctorate. It was a struggle, but it was worth it.
Now
And eventually finished this doggone thing.
You go from a southern city, inner city school system to an eastern city in New Jersey. What are the differences and similarities in terms of schools?
Contrary to belief, I found that the schools in the East, in particular those that I was involved in, were more segregated. There were more problems than I had experienced in the South. There were more divisions. There were more groups. You had people in these schools from different parts of the world, and they had their own groups. So there were more internal problems between students and among students in the school systems that I am familiar with in the East.
And how long were you in New Jersey?
I was in New Jersey about 2.5 years, maybe 3 years.
And then you get an opportunity to move again and you go to Indianapolis.
Go to Indianapolis, going back, an opportunity to return to my first love, which was art. Started up a new program at the Indianapolis Museum of Art in Indianapolis. They had received a lot of money from the same group that had selected me as one of 10 American heroes in education a few years later. Lala Wallace, Reader's Digest, gave a big chunk of money to this museum to diversify its audience. And they were looking for someone who could do that. They were really looking for somebody from their own area. I applied for the job and was selected. Shortly after taking on this position, I realized that there were opportunities in this field, a lot of opportunities for African Americans, and said to my wife, I think I've stumbled on something here.
What did you see in Indianapolis that you liked that would keep you in that particular area, in that field?
Well, I liked the city. Thought it was a nice place to raise a family. My kids were getting older. Thought it was a nice place to raise a family. I thought it was a great opportunity because it was a new position. The people didn't know exactly how they were going to get to where they were going, but they knew where they wanted to go. So I thought I could create. I thought I could use my creative ability. I'm a creative person. It was another opportunity for me to help people. Now you think about all of the different things that I've done, they've all been related to helping people. You think about what I told you when I said I wanted to return to New Orleans as a teacher. It was to give back. Every place I've been, there has been this thing in my head that's saying, hey, don't forget where you've come from. You have to help other people. People have helped you to get where you are. So that has been an underlying motive of all of the jobs that I've had. I mean, that has been something that has been a driving force in me. Trying to help other people, trying to help my own people, trying to help other people have a better understanding of us, trying to help us understand ourselves. All of those things are in this mix that I'm feeling. Indianapolis also was, as I said, it was an opportunity for me to keep moving in this direction. But it was also an opportunity for me to go back to something that I cared about for most of my life, and that was art. I've always been connected to art in some form or fashion. It was also an opportunity for me to utilize most of the things that I had experienced in life. My administrative experience, my interest in education, my interest in art, what I perceived to be, and I still think I had this ability to work with people to move toward a common goal. So I thought I could put all of those things together at the Indianapolis Museum of Art, while at the same time explore a new field.
Before we get too far afield into looking at the field that you are presently involved in as an educator, what happened with education? You've seen it in the South, you saw it in the East. During the period of time when we were in school, during our generation, you made the statement that people cared and they challenged you. What happened that now inner city education is totally under fire? What took place to create that difference in the last 20, 30 years in education in our inner cities?
I think there are a lot of things that have happened. If I could really answer that and resolve this, I could make a lot of money. But I'll tell you some things that I think have contributed to the problems that we see now. One, we have problems within our families. We have a lot of homes that are not headed by anybody, to be perfectly honest. You know, we talk about whether they're headed by male or female. Some of these homes are headed by children. Okay. I see that as a problem. There has been a problem with youngsters, as I see it, not respecting adults. Now, why that exists, it has to be related to their experiences at home. But to really define it in any one form or fashion, I can't. But that is a problem. I see youngsters who are walking on the streets, they're using vulgar language with disregard of any adult who is in earshot of what they're saying. During my time, you could not do that. You would have a big problem. Adults are afraid to talk to kids. That's another part of the problem. But in schools, as I see it, the number one problem is low expectations. We expect kids to fail, and so they fail. I think if we could address the expectations of youngsters in a positive way, I think we'd experience more success than we are now. I am really oversimplifying this doggone problem.
Yeah, right.
But the number one thing as an educator that I see is that the expectation is low for kids. And no matter what we say, we can't fool these kids, because it's not what you say, it's what you do, it's what you convey to kids non-verbally about what you expect from them, I think, that they really believe.
In Birmingham, we have a situation where education is under fire. As an educator, are there any areas that you see, whether it's Birmingham or New Orleans or New York, that you definitely would have to deal with in order to correct what we feel is wrong in our system today?
Every place I've been, Horace, it's been the same problem. It's at the board level. That's where you have to start. You have to really find people who have children as their number one priority and will bite these tough bullets that we need to look at in a very affirmative way that will have a positive impact on children. And I've lived in New Orleans, I've lived in New Jersey, well, I've lived in Indiana, and now here in Birmingham. Every place, the problems are similar. And from my perspective, it appears as though we're not getting the right leadership at the board level. And as a result of that, those problems that you're experiencing at the board level, it filter down to the superintendent and the superintendent's staff. Education, positive, effective, meaningful education has to be a top priority at the board level, and we have to move away from these political
The leadership
problems that we experience. Yeah, it starts at the top.
Now, you would somehow find out about a position in Birmingham, Alabama. You were at the Museum of Art in Indianapolis, and you make a decision to leave there and come to Birmingham. Why?
Yeah. Well, I think it's important for me to share with you, one, how I found out about the position and why somebody thought I might be the guy. After working at the Indianapolis Museum of Art for about 4 months, I became aware of the African American Museum Association, and I joined. I attended a conference in Roanoke, Virginia, and met some of the key players in the organization. Comparatively speaking, when you look at other professional organizations, AAMA, as I'll refer to it, is a small group, but there are a lot of committee people in the group. I shared with some of the council members. As a matter of fact, I met one of the council members on a plane going to Roanoke. Didn't know this lady was on the council. Told her a little bit about my background, that I was at the Indianapolis Museum of Art, that I wanted to make a contribution, I wanted to help, and I wanted to learn as much as I could while working in Indianapolis, but my goal was to go to an African American museum where I could continue what I've been doing all my life, is what I said, trying to help people, trying to educate folks. And unbeknown to me, there was a council meeting, my name surfaces. I had talked with other council members during my stay in Roanoke, not knowing these people on the council, but folks see I'm new and they want to know who I am, what I'm doing, etc. So I'm saying to a variety of people basically the same thing. Hey, I want to get involved, I want to help, let me know what I can do. Well, normally when you tell people you're willing to help, you find yourself with a job. And so I found myself being asked to help with the next conference, and I did. And within a very short period of time, to make a long story short, I became a council member. And the president of the association and other council members and other people in the field quickly learned that I was in the field, that I was interested in helping, that I was working at a museum, what's called the mainstream museum in the field, and that I had something to offer. And people encouraged me, and here I go with people encouraging me, saying, hey, something's gonna open up, be patient. And as I told you before, in many instances, things have happened to me quickly. And within 2.5 years in the field, I became very popular. During that time, the guy who I worked for recognized that he could use me. He could use me to promote what he was doing at his museum. And I recognized that. But I also saw the opportunity to let people in the field know that I had some ability, So I said, okay, use me. But I'm gonna let people know what I have on the ball here. And so it was a win-win situation, my working in Indianapolis. I was able to help some people. I was able to help, and some of those people are our people who became subcontractors with the museum, employees with the museum. We did some programming with that museum, so we were able to help.
So
I
you
helped
got-
the director in terms.
You got the black community involved.
That's right. That was my charge. That was my charge. Not only as visitors, but as employees. That was important to me. And not just full-time employees, but people who provide services to the museum that brought them funds. I mean, the museum was contracting with a lot of people, so we brought in some African Americans who they could contract with, who they had not contracted with previously. So we were able to help in the African American community during our brief stay there. Also expose to the museum staff African Americans who knew what they were doing. So they had a better appreciation, I think, of what we had in the community. Gave the director an opportunity to showcase an African American that he had, so he was able to go and tell his colleagues and people in the field, I got one. Okay, I understood what that was all about. But it also gave me an opportunity to show people around the country what I could do and what I had done in Indianapolis, because I found myself going out in the field speaking about what we were doing in Indianapolis. And with supporting documentation where people understood that I wasn't just talking about something that I was doing, but I was actually doing something. So after approximately 2.5 years, people began contacting me about employment. The president of I was about to accept a job in Chicago because I was as the director of a facility, of a museum.
Solid.
Yes, I was in the final stages of the screening process and had been told that, we want you for this job. And put that on hold because I received a call from the president of the African American Museum Association who said to me, it's my understanding that the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute is looking for an executive director. And he said, are you interested? And I said, yes. I had been here on 2 occasions. I have a friend here in Birmingham, and shortly after this place opened, I came to visit. About a year after it was open, I came back a second time because my family is still there, my parents, my in-laws are still in New Orleans, Louisiana, so wherever we lived, we have passed through Birmingham, my family and I, to visit New Orleans. So I was familiar with the facility, overwhelmed with it when I first came. And when I was told that there was a possibility of employment here, I seized that opportunity.
What was the attraction in terms of facility?
What this place stands for. It was directly related to my personal experiences. I mean, I grew up with this. I experienced this. It was another opportunity, again, to help educate, to make a difference. In an environment, and when I say environment, I'm talking about the entire community, that I'm comfortable with, that I was familiar with. For the first time, my family and I, since leaving New Orleans, would be in an environment where we had a friend. Where I knew somebody.
And that makes a big
difference. That makes a big difference. Where I was really close to home. Where I felt at home. So those things are some of the reasons that I came here. I was impressed with some of the board members who I interviewed with. And that's a whole story. I mean, when you work for a board, they're going to be good and bad days. And in particular, when you're working for the first board, that brings on a whole different set of circumstances. But when I looked at the total picture, I felt good about what I saw, and I still feel good about it.
What do you view as your major contribution since you've been
organization. I would like to think that that's going to be my major contribution, helping to organize the place. At some point in maybe the near future, you're going to need a different person to come in here. But I think my major contribution has been and should be helping to organize the place, putting policies in place, getting people familiar with how to operate, how to work together. That's been a struggle. How with the setting a high level of expectations, getting people to function in a very professional manner, knowing that they should go to the top, don't go to the second step. Earl Graves, when he was here, talked about that. You go to the top. Now with a new group of people, people here for the most part have not been in leadership positions.
Right.
Most of the people that we find here, great people, want to do a good job, just need somebody to help them to find their way. Somebody who's going to wrap their arms around them, having a high level of expectations, calling a spade, but being sensitive to the fact that all these people are new. And they want somebody to help them to work effectively. And so I see that as my role, being a leader but a friend. It's like being a father figure, I guess. It's like I guess that's a part of it all. So when people have problems, they're willing to come and talk with me about those problems, not feeling like I'm a guy they can't talk to. Recognizing that I'm just another brother who happens to provide leadership here, but who has not forgotten where he's come from. That is really important to me, that people recognize that.
Well, I think you've been rather successful in accomplishing that, because you have a smooth running ship and people walk through and they always talk about how nice it is maintained. So
that is great. I feel good about that, Horace. I remember when my wife and I came to visit the Institute before I accepted the position, and she told me, what you have just said is what my wife said to me would be my biggest challenge, maintaining this facility. And I really think, and I guess I'm looking at this through rose-colored glasses, but I think we've done a good job at that. I think this place is in good shape, man. I think when you and I and others are gone, if we've done our job, people will come here and they'll find a good place.
I want to thank you for taking this hour out of your busy schedule. I know that you have many, many things that you have to do. We need to do this again, but I appreciate this morning.
Thanks, I've enjoyed it, man.